It's funny how life can seem so perfect, and then in the blink of an eye, everything can change. The year was 2018, and I was living what seemed to be the dream life. I was married to an amazing woman, Kelly, and we had 2 beautiful kids. Our little house in the suburbs of Denver was cozy, and everything felt just right. I had a good job as a financial analyst, which kept me busy but paid the bills, and Kelly, she worked as a nurse. Well, she was the heart of our family. I don't know how she did it, balancing work and home life with such grace, but she always made it look effortless. But looking back now, I can see the signs. They were there, little cracks in the perfect picture. It was like a slow burn, and by the time I realized it, the fire was already out of control. Let me take you back to when things were still simple, when I thought everything was in its place. It was a sunny Saturday morning in April, and I remember sitting down to breakfast with Kelly and the kids, Ethan and Lily, our 2 little bundles of energy. It was one of those mornings where everyone was still in their pajamas, and the air smelled like pancakes and coffee. The kind of morning that makes you feel like nothing could go wrong. Kelly, being the organizer she is, had already started talking about the weekend plans. She was going to a work conference in a few days, so I'd be holding down the fort with the kids for a few days while she was away. She was excited about the trip. She always got a little giddy when it was time to be around her colleagues, learning new things. I could tell she loved her work, and that was something I admired about her. Everything was as normal as it could be. But that's the thing, right? When everything is too normal, too perfect, you sometimes forget to look closer. And I wasn't looking closely enough. Kelly had always been outgoing, friendly, the type of person who made friends easily. She'd been in Denver for about 5 years before I met her. I, on the other hand, was a bit more reserved. I had a close-knit group of friends, but I wasn't the type to expand my social circle too much. I was happy with what I had. But when Kelly and I met, it was like something clicked. We balanced each other out. I loved her energy, her spirit, and she loved my steady, grounded nature. It just worked. Fast forward to that Saturday morning. Kelly's excitement about the conference was palpable. But there was something in the air that day, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. She was a little too enthusiastic, maybe even a little distant. But I shrugged it off. People get excited about trips, right? I wasn't the kind of person to read into things without reason. The kids were fighting over who got the last pancake, which was a usual Saturday morning occurrence, and Kelly was trying to mediate. I was sitting back, trying to enjoy my coffee, when she said something that stuck with me. You know, I'm really glad you and I get this weekend together before I leave. It'll be good to just relax. Yeah, me too, I replied with a smile. We should do something special before you head out. There was a moment where she looked at me, kind of far away, like she was already somewhere else. I didn't think much of it at the time, just another passing moment. But in hindsight, I should have paid more attention. Later that day, I dropped Kelly off at the airport. We kissed goodbye. I told her to have a good time, and then I drove back home. The kids were with their grandparents for the weekend, which gave me a rare moment of peace. I was looking forward to a couple of days to myself. Some time to catch up on work, maybe do some things around the house. A little break from the usual chaos. That night, I went to bed early. The house felt quieter without Kelly's constant chatter, but I was used to it. She was always busy, always doing something, and I knew I'd hear all about her conference when she came back. I had no reason to suspect that anything was off. But then came the phone call. It was the next day, a Sunday afternoon. I'd been working on a report, and my phone buzzed with a text message from Kelly. It was simple enough. Hey, I'm going out for drinks with some of the girls after the conference. Be back later. Now, I'm not the jealous type. I know Kelly well enough to trust her, and I wasn't about to start second-guessing her actions. Still, there was something in the message that made me pause. It wasn't like her to go out like that, especially when she had to be up early the next morning for the conference. But again, I didn't read too much into it. It wasn't out of the ordinary for her to hang out with her colleagues every once in a while. The evening passed uneventfully, and I settled into my routine. I stayed up late, watching TV and finishing some work. When I woke up the next morning, my phone was buzzing with a missed call from Kelly. It was early, about 7 a.m., and I figured she was probably just calling to check in. But then I checked the timestamp on the missed call, and something didn't sit right with me. It was from 3 a.m. Now, I don't know if you've ever had one of those moments where you feel like something's off, but you can't quite figure out why. This was one of those moments. Why was she calling me at 3 a.m.? Was she okay? Did something happen? I called her back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. My stomach dropped. I started to worry. Kelly was always good about keeping in touch. If she was out with friends or at a work event, she'd check in. But now, she wasn't answering, and I was starting to get that gut feeling that something wasn't right. I kept calling, leaving messages, sending texts, but still nothing. Then, at about 10 a.m., I finally got a response. It was a short message. Sorry, I fell asleep at a friend's place. I'll call you later. Okay, maybe it was nothing. Maybe she just stayed out later than expected and crashed. But the feeling in the pit of my stomach was hard to shake. There was just something about it. Something about that missed call and the lack of clarity in her text that didn't add up. I let it go for the moment. Maybe I was overthinking things. After all, she had told me she'd be busy, right? And I knew Kelly. She wasn't the type to hide things from me. But that night, something happened that I wasn't prepared for. I'm not one to snoop. I've always believed in trusting my partner, in trusting Kelly. But as I was sitting in the living room that evening, something made me glance at her phone when it lit up on the kitchen counter. The message preview showed a name I didn't recognize. And just like that, the seed of doubt was planted. All right, let me take you back to that moment. You know, the one when everything starts to shift and you can feel the change in the air, but you don't quite know where it's headed. That was the moment for me. When I saw that name pop up on Kelly's phone screen, I felt something stir deep inside me. It wasn't a huge red flag, more like a little flicker, a spark that could either turn into a fire or fizzle out. I wasn't sure yet, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The name that caught my attention was Brad. Now, I'll be honest with you, I didn't recognize it. We had a lot of mutual friends, so I wasn't too worried about Kelly making new ones. But Brad, that name? I'd never heard her mention him before, and that alone was enough to make my stomach do a little flip. I didn't act on it right away. I'm not the type of person to jump to conclusions, and trust has always been a pillar of our relationship. But as the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Kelly's behavior started to shift too. She became more distant, more preoccupied. She'd come home late from her work conference, but instead of sharing details about the trip, she'd brush me off with short answers. She'd often go to bed earlier than usual, almost like she was avoiding conversation. And there was something else, something that was harder to pinpoint, a shift in her energy. Felt like she was physically present, but mentally, emotionally, she wasn't there. I tried to ignore it at first. I didn't want to be that guy, the guy who checks phones or snoops through messages. But every time I saw her phone lighting up with a message from Brad, I found myself growing more uneasy. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just a friend. Maybe they were just talking about work or some new project she was excited about. But then came that night when everything changed. It was a Wednesday evening, and Kelly had gotten home later than usual from a dinner with a few of her colleagues. She'd promised to be home by 9, but it was nearly 11 when she walked through the door. She apologized, saying the dinner ran longer than expected, but I could tell something was off. She didn't look like her usual self. Her smile seemed forced, and there was a nervous energy in the way she moved. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. After all, she had been working long hours, and maybe she was just tired.
So I let it go.
I tried to act normal to keep the atmosphere light. But as the night wore on, it became harder to ignore the tension building between us. When we went to bed, Kelly pulled the covers up around her, avoiding eye contact. She was always a cuddler, always the type to snuggle up close. But tonight, she was distant. I didn't say anything, but it didn't escape my notice. The next morning, when she left for work, I did what I promised myself I wouldn't do. I grabbed her phone. I know. It's not something I'm proud of. But in that moment, I felt this overwhelming need to know, to understand what was happening. Why was she pulling away? What was going on with Brad? And so, I unlocked her phone, went to her messages, and found exactly what I was looking for. Or should I say what I wasn't expecting to find? There it was, a message from Brad, sent just a few hours before. The text was simple enough. I can't stop thinking about you. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. My heart dropped. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I froze, staring at the screen, trying to wrap my mind around it. What did this mean? Was Kelly cheating on me? Was it a fling? A mistake? Or was it something deeper? The questions were flooding my mind, and I couldn't stop them. I sat there for what felt like hours, numb, trying to figure out my next move. But all I could think about was how I had to confront her. I had to know the truth. So, I put the phone down and tried to collect myself. It wasn't like me to act impulsively, but in that moment I wasn't thinking clearly. The anger, the hurt, the confusion, they were all bubbling up inside me, threatening to overflow. But instead of confronting her right away, I decided to wait. I needed to think. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I did anything I would regret. So, I spent the rest of the day in a haze, just going through the motions, trying to pretend like everything was fine. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Kelly came home that evening and things were tense, to say the least. We made small talk, nothing too serious. But I couldn't stop thinking about that message. And as the evening went on, I could feel my resolve starting to crack. I knew I had to say something. At around 10 p.m., as we were getting ready for bed, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I turned to Kelly, my voice shaking, and said, "Who's Brad?" Her face went pale and she froze. I could see her struggle to find the right words. For a moment, she said nothing, just looking at me, almost like she was searching for a way out. And that's when I knew something was definitely off. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's just a guy I met at the conference. We've been talking, but it's nothing." I wasn't convinced. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She was lying, and I could feel it in my bones. I pressed her, asking more questions, trying to get to the truth. The more I pushed, the more defensive she became. Her answers didn't add up, and the cracks in her story started to show. "You can't just tell me you're talking, Kelly. I saw the messages. I saw what you said. Don't lie to me," I said, my voice rising now. Her eyes welled up with tears. She looked guilty, but she wasn't ready to admit it. "Bob, please. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." And there it was, the truth was starting to slip out. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this?" I repeated, stunned. "What, you thought I wouldn't find out? You thought I wouldn't see the messages?" She took a shaky breath, and then it came tumbling out. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, but it happened. I made a mistake." A mistake. That's what she called it. My heart was pounding now, and I could feel the anger starting to rise. "How long, Kelly? How long has this been going on?" She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "A few months, but it was just... we were just talking."
Nothing physical.
I swear. But I didn't believe her. At that point, I couldn't. I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. Let me tell you, when Kelly admitted to having an affair with Brad, the ground beneath me shifted. It felt like the whole world had stopped, and I was standing in the middle of it, just trying to keep my balance. I could barely breathe, my mind racing to comprehend everything she had just said. I had always trusted her. She was my partner, my best friend. And to find out that she had been hiding something so big, it shattered everything. But there was one part of me, the logical part, that couldn't help but keep asking, why? Why Brad? Of all people. I didn't know him, didn't even know if he was a real threat. All I had were those text messages, and Kelly's vague explanations. But something told me this wasn't just a mistake. It had been going on for months, and now she was sitting there, asking me to believe it was a one-time lapse. As we sat there in the living room, the silence between us felt deafening. Kelly, now visibly distressed, kept apologizing, but the more she apologized, the more I felt the anger rise in me. The betrayal ran deep, and no matter how much she cried or begged, I couldn't ignore what she had done. "You're telling me this just happened?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Months, Kelly? And you're telling me it's just some mistake?" I never meant for it to happen this way, she said, her voice cracking. She reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled back, unable to accept her touch in that moment. It happened, and I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you, but it wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the fact that she had lied to my face for months. It was the fact that she had let Brad into our lives, into our world. I had trusted her with everything, and she had betrayed that trust in the worst way possible. I stood up abruptly, walking away from her, pacing in the kitchen. I needed space, time to process. Everything was spinning. How had I missed the signs? The late nights, the weird texts, the subtle changes in her behavior. I thought I was being the good husband, the supportive partner, but apparently, I had been blind to the cracks forming in our relationship. Kelly followed me into the kitchen, still pleading for my forgiveness. She promised she'd end things with Brad, that it was over, that she loved me and only me, but the damage had been done. The trust was gone, and I didn't know how to rebuild it. I don't know if I can forgive you, Kelly, I said, my voice cold. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Her face fell, and she took a step back, the realization of what she had done fully hitting her. I never wanted to hurt you, I swear. I never thought this would happen, but I wasn't ready to hear it. Couldn't. The more she apologized, the more I felt the anger and betrayal bubble up inside me. I wanted to scream, to yell at her, but I didn't. I just stood there, numb. I told her I needed some time alone, some space to figure out what I was going to do. And with that, I left the house, heading out for a walk to clear my head. I couldn't be in that house anymore. It felt like a prison, a reminder of everything that had fallen apart in just one night. As I walked, the cool evening air did little to calm the storm raging inside me. My mind kept going back to Brad. Who was he? Why had she chosen him? What was it about him that I didn't have? It was eating me alive, this sense of inadequacy, this feeling that somehow I had failed her. I knew I needed to confront Brad. I needed to look him in the eyes and hear him admit what he had done. I wasn't sure what I would do once I got there, but I couldn't sit in the dark, wondering. So I made a decision. I called him. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message, telling him I knew everything, that he needed to meet me, that we needed to talk. I didn't care if he was scared. He was the one who had messed up, not me. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Kelly. She had sent me a long message, apologizing again, saying how much she regretted what had happened. But this time it felt different. It wasn't just the typical, "I'm sorry" text. There was something more desperate in her words. Something that made me wonder if she was afraid of losing me. "Bob," she wrote, "I don't know what I've done. I can't take back what happened, but I want to try and make things right. Please don't give up on us. Please." I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it all. I loved her, I really did, but the hurt was too deep. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe I needed to step away. Maybe I needed to walk away from everything to heal, to find peace. But before I could make any decisions, Brad called me back. His voice was shaky when he answered, and I could tell he was nervous. He didn't know what I knew, but I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of pretending. "Brad," I said, my voice steady but laced with anger. "I know about you and Kelly. I know everything, and you're going to meet me. Now." I could hear him swallow hard on the other end. "Listen, man, I didn't mean for this to happen. It was just a mistake. I was weak, and don't make excuses." I cut him off. "Meet me and we'll talk. You don't have a choice." He agreed to meet me in an hour. I didn't know what I was going to do when I saw him, but I was determined to make him understand the pain he had caused, to make him feel just a fraction of what I was feeling. So there I was, waiting outside the coffee shop, my fists clenched, every muscle in my body tense. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I was ready for whatever came. When Brad finally walked up, I didn't say a word. I just stared at him, waiting for him to make the first move. He looked just as nervous as I expected, glancing around like he wanted to bolt. "Bob, man, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. You have to understand. Kelly and I, It was just something that happened, and it was a huge mistake. I didn't say anything. I just stared at him, letting the silence linger. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing I wasn't going to back down. Look, I'm sorry. I really am, he continued, running his hand through his hair. I didn't think it would go this far, but it just did. She told me you two were having problems, and I don't know. I didn't mean to get in the middle of it. I clenched my jaw, my anger threatening to break free. You think that makes it okay? I spat. You think because we were having problems, you had the right to get involved with my wife? My family? You crossed a line, Brad. A line you can't come back from. His face flushed with guilt. I know. I screwed up. But it wasn't all about that. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I never meant to. I stepped closer, my voice low and menacing. You didn't think. That's your problem. You didn't think about the consequences. You didn't think about Kelly, about our kids. You didn't think about anything except your own damn needs. He didn't know how to respond. He stood there, looking like he wanted to say more, but the words wouldn't come. Stay away from her. I warned him, my voice calm but dangerous. You don't get to be part of my life anymore. You've taken enough from me. With that, I turned and walked away, feeling the weight of what I had just done. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't closure. But it was the first step in taking control of my life again. If you're hooked on this story and want to hear how it ends, don't forget to like, comment, and share. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the next twist in this roller coaster of a story. Now, let's keep going. Let me tell you, the days after my confrontation with Brad felt like they stretched on forever. It wasn't just about Kelly's affair anymore. It was about everything I thought I knew being turned upside down. I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into a chasm of uncertainty. I could feel the tension building, the stakes rising with every passing moment. This wasn't just about a marriage falling apart. It was about my life, my identity, and everything I thought was stable. I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to process what had happened, but the weight of the betrayal was always there, hanging over me like a dark cloud. Kelly, desperate for forgiveness, tried to reach out to me at every turn. She sent texts, left voicemails, and even showed up at the door asking to talk. But I wasn't ready. Every time I saw her, the anger flared up again. The lies, the secrecy, the way she'd betrayed my trust. It was all too much. The worst part was seeing her break down in front of me. The guilt and remorse were clear on her face, but it didn't soften the blow. She had chosen Brad, not once, but repeatedly over months. And every time she apologized, it felt like a reminder of what she had done. It wasn't enough. One evening, about a week after the confrontation, she came to me with tears in her eyes. Please, Bob, she begged. I need you to listen. I know I messed up, but I want to fix this. I love you. Please don't give up on us. I looked at her, the woman I had loved for years, and I felt nothing. Not the love, not the connection, nothing. It was like the emotional foundation that had once held us together had crumbled. And no matter how much she cried, no matter how many times she begged for forgiveness, I couldn't find it in myself to forgive her. I was done. Kelly? I said, my voice flat and cold. You had your chance, and you blew it. Her face twisted in pain, but I couldn't soften. I couldn't give her what she wanted. Not this time. That night, I did something I hadn't done before. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and walked out of the house. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed space. I needed air. The suffocating weight of everything that had happened was too much to bear. I drove aimlessly for hours until I found myself at the lake. It was a place I had always gone to think, to find clarity when my mind was clouded. I sat there, staring at the water, listening to the faint rustle of the trees, and I felt a deep sense of emptiness. For the first time in a long while, I was truly alone. And it hurt, but it also gave me time to think. I realized that I couldn't go back to the way things were. The trust was shattered, and I couldn't pretend it wasn't. No matter how much I loved Kelly, or thought I did, the betrayal had left a permanent mark on me. I didn't know if I could ever move past it, I didn't know if I even wanted to. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I got a call. It was Kelly. I let it ring, then turned my phone off. I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to hear the desperate, pleading voice on the other end. But deep down, I knew I couldn't avoid this conversation forever. The next morning, I went back home. Kelly wasn't there. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter, telling me she'd gone to her mom's to give me space. I didn't know what to feel, relief or anger. Both, maybe. But I knew this was it. This was the breaking point. I spent the next few days trying to figure out what I was going to do. The kids were with my sister, so I had some time to think, to make a decision. But the more I thought, the more confused I became. Part of me wanted to fight for the family we had built. Part of me wanted to give Kelly another chance, to forgive her, to try and make things work. But then, I'd remember the lies, the betrayal, and it would hit me all over again. I couldn't just erase it. And then, something unexpected happened. I got a call from my lawyer. "Bob," he said, his tone serious. "Kelly's filed for divorce." At first, I didn't know how to react. I just sat there, stunned. Kelly had made the decision for me. She had decided that she was done, and that she wanted to move on. It felt like the last bit of control I had was slipping away. I hadn't made a decision yet, but now it was being made for me. That night, Kelly came home. We hadn't spoken in a few days, and the tension between us was thick. I could see it in her eyes, the mixture of guilt and fear. She had made her choice. She had filed for divorce, and I knew she was afraid of how I'd react. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of losing her. The truth was, I had already lost her. "Bob," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I didn't want it to end like this. I thought we could fix things." I looked at her, my heart heavy. "It's too late for that, Kelly. You made your choice. You chose him." She recoiled, her face crumpling with emotion. "I didn't want it to be like this. I love you. I made a huge mistake." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "No, you didn't make a mistake, Kelly. You chose it. You chose him over me, over our family. And that's something I can't forget." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was deafening. And then she did something that completely caught me off guard. She dropped to her knees in front of me, sobbing. "Please, Bob, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I love you. I never thought I'd end up here." I didn't know how to react. A part of me wanted to feel sympathy for her, wanted to comfort her. But I couldn't. The part of me that had trusted her was gone. The part of me that had believed in our future together was gone. And it hurt more than anything else. I stood up, taking a step back. "I can't do this anymore. You don't get to beg for my forgiveness now. You don't get to cry and expect me to forget what you did." She looked up at me, pleading with her eyes. "Please don't do this. We can fix it. We can go to therapy. We can make this work." But I knew deep down that we couldn't. The trust was broken, and it wasn't something that could be fixed with therapy or more apologies. It was too late for us. "Goodbye, Kelly," I said, my voice steady despite the pain gnawing at me. "It's over." She collapsed in tears, her body shaking with sobs, but I turned and walked away. I couldn't stay. I couldn't pretend like everything was fine. It was over, and I had to accept that. The days after Kelly filed for divorce were the hardest of my life. It felt like everything I had worked so hard for, the family, the home, the life we had built together, was slipping away, piece by piece. The emotional toll was suffocating. And the more I tried to bury myself in work or distractions, the more the reality of what had happened consumed me. It was clear now that Kelly wasn't going to fight for us anymore. She had made her decision, and I had to accept that. The house felt emptier with each passing day, every room echoing with memories of a time before the betrayal. But something unexpected happened in the midst of all this pain. I started to find a sense of clarity. The first step was confronting Brad, and after that, things started to shift inside me. I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. I had to make a choice. I could keep fighting for something that was already broken, or I could move on and find a way to heal. But healing wasn't easy. It was a slow, painful process. one that required me to face the anger and sadness head-on. One night, about 2 weeks after Kelly left, I was sitting in the living room, staring at the walls. My mind was spinning, consumed with questions. I still had so many things left unsaid, so much that I wanted to confront her about. I needed closure, but it wasn't just about her. It was about me too. Just then, I got a text. It was from Kelly. "I need to see you. Please. I have something important to say." I stared at the message for a while, my heart racing. Was she going to try to fix things again? Or was this just another round of apologies? But I knew I couldn't keep putting it off. I couldn't avoid the inevitable. So I responded, "Okay, let's meet tomorrow." The next day, I met Kelly at the park. It wasn't the place I would have chosen, but it was neutral ground. We sat on a bench, the cool autumn breeze cutting through the air as she nervously fidgeted with her hands. "I don't even know where to start," Kelly said, her voice shaky. "I've thought about this moment 1,000 times, and nothing seems right." I didn't speak. I just looked at her, waiting for her to get to the point. Part of me wanted to yell, to make her feel the weight of everything she had done. But the other part of me wanted answers. I needed to know why. "I don't know how I can ever make up for what I did," she continued, tears welling up in her eyes. "I was selfish. I didn't think about you, about the family. I didn't even think about myself. I was just lost. And now, I regret it more than anything. I wish I could go back, change things, but I can't." Her words felt hollow. She was remorseful, but it didn't erase the hurt. I had heard it all before. The "I'm sorry, yes," the "it won't happen again," but it didn't change the fact that she had made a choice, again and again, knowing it was wrong. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Kelly," I said, my voice steady. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." She reached out to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "Please, Bob, don't say that. We can fix this. We can start over." But I knew it wasn't that simple. It wasn't just about fixing things. The damage was too deep. The trust was gone, and no amount of apologies could change that. "Kelly," I said, my voice softer now, I've tried to forgive you, but every time I think about it, about what you did, I feel like I'm drowning." She sat back, looking devastated. "I never meant to hurt you like this. I thought I could handle it, but I was wrong. I was so wrong." I let the silence hang between us for a few moments before speaking again. "The thing is, Kelly, I don't know if I can move forward, and I don't want to waste any more time pretending like I'm okay. I need to heal, and I can't do that if I keep holding on to this." The tears she had been holding back spilled over. "I understand. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I love you. I've always loved you." I looked at her, and for the first time I wasn't angry. I was just tired. Tired of carrying this pain. Tired of trying to make things work when they were already beyond saving. "I need space, Kelly," I said, standing up. "I need to let go." She didn't say anything else. She just nodded, as if she knew the truth, too. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. I wasn't sure if I was ready to let go entirely, but I knew I had to take the first step. That night, I packed my things and left the house. I moved into a small apartment, a temporary place to find some distance from everything. I needed time to think. Time to figure out what my life was going to look like without her. A few days later, I got a call from my lawyer. The divorce proceedings were moving forward. Kelly was serious about ending things, and I had to face the reality that this was happening. It wasn't easy. No one ever dreams of getting divorced, especially not when you have kids, a home, a history together. But this was the life I had been handed, and now I had to figure out how to rebuild. I met with my lawyer to go over the details. Kelly was asking for a significant amount of spousal support. I wasn't sure if I should be angry or sad about it. We had both contributed to our life together, but it felt like she was trying to take everything from me. Our house, our life, our future. It was hard to swallow, but I wasn't going to give in. I knew that standing up for myself was the only way to move forward. And that's exactly what I did. I fought for what was right, for my family, for my future. Kelly's lawyer tried to pressure me into agreeing to a settlement, but I wasn't about to back down. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything. I wasn't going to let her think she could just take what she wanted and leave me in the dust. The battle was long, and it was draining. But every day, I became more determined. I knew I was doing the right thing, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. As the legal proceedings continued, something inside me started to shift. I was no longer the man I had been. The pain from the betrayal was still there, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. I had started to regain control of my life. I was standing up for myself. And while I wasn't sure where I was headed, I knew I was taking the right steps to get there. One evening, as I was leaving my lawyer's office, I ran into Kelly. She was sitting on the steps, looking lost. I hadn't seen her in weeks, and the sight of her brought back everything. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal. But when she saw me, she didn't try to run or avoid me. She stood up, her face pale. "I know we're not there yet, Bob," she said quietly. "But I want you to know, I'll always love you. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that." I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at her, trying to figure out if I was ready to hear those words. But in that moment, I realized something. The past was gone. There was no going back to what we had. But that didn't mean I had to hold on to the pain. "I know," I said softly, "but it's time to move on. If you're still hooked on this wild ride, hit that like button, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. The story's almost over, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next." We all have moments in life where we face crossroads, where the decisions we make can shape everything that comes after. It's a strange thing having that kind of power. You don't always realize it when you're in the thick of it, but looking back, it becomes crystal clear. And that's where I was, at the crossroads. Kelly and I had spent so many years together, years that were supposed to define us, and now they were slipping away like sand through my fingers. But I had one thing going for me: clarity. It wasn't easy getting there. In fact, the journey had been a nightmare, and I still couldn't get rid of the image of Kelly, tears streaming down her face, begging for my forgiveness. The heartache had been suffocating, but with each day that passed, the weight of it lifted just a little bit more. It felt like I was standing on the edge of something new, something I hadn't been ready to accept until now. And now, as I stood there looking at Kelly, hearing her words, I knew that the time for decisions had come. I couldn't keep dragging this out. I couldn't keep living in limbo. "I don't want to hurt you anymore," Kelly said softly, her voice trembling. She had said those words more times than I could count, but this time they hit differently. "I know I've made mistakes, and I know I've hurt you in ways that can never be undone. But I need you to know that I will always love you. I'll always carry you with me, no matter where life takes me." Her eyes, filled with regret and sorrow, were a sharp contrast to the cold, empty look I had been wearing for the last few weeks. But it wasn't just her words. It was the way she stood there, vulnerable, with no defenses left. She knew she had nothing to hold on to anymore. And honestly, neither did I. The anger I had been holding on to was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it was becoming more and more distant. With each passing day, I realized that holding on to that anger wasn't doing me any favors. I had to let go. Let her go. "I know, Kelly," I said quietly, my voice hoarse. "I know you love me, but I can't live in this shadow anymore. I can't keep pretending like everything's okay. You chose this, and I have to choose something different." She closed her eyes for a moment, and I could see the defeat in her posture. She had made her choice months ago, and she had to live with the consequences. But so did I, and it wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be neat. There would be pain. There would be days where I wished things had turned out differently. But the truth was, I was tired. I was tired of carrying the weight of her mistakes. I was tired of feeling like I was the one who had to fix everything. I think we're both done here," I said, my voice breaking. "You've made your decision."
I've mademine.
For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. It was subtle, but it was there. The decision had been made, and it was final. No more second-guessing, no more pretending like things could go back to the way they were. It wasn't possible. We both stood there for a few moments, just letting the silence hang between us. The tension had been building for so long that it felt like we had reached the breaking point. And finally, we had. "I'm sorry, Bob," Kelly whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I never meant to ruin everything." And with that, I turned and walked away. In the weeks that followed, I started to piece my life back together. The divorce proceedings moved forward, but there was something freeing about it. It was like the final tie to Kelly was being severed, and I was slowly starting to breathe again. It didn't happen overnight. There were nights when I would lie awake, thinking about the past, thinking about the good times, the way things used to be. But those moments grew fewer and farther between as time passed. The most challenging part was facing the reality of what had come next. Our kids, Ethan and Lily, they were the ones who were truly innocent in all of this, and they had their own emotional battles to fight. Ethan was old enough to understand that something was wrong. He could feel the tension, the unease in the air. Lily, on the other hand, was still too young to fully grasp what was happening, but she could sense that something had changed. It was heartbreaking having to tell them. The day we sat them down to explain that Kelly and I were getting divorced was one of the hardest moments of my life. Ethan had questions, so many questions. Questions I wasn't prepared to answer. "Does this mean you're not going to live with us anymore, Dad?" Ethan asked, his voice small. "Of course not, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll always be here for you and Lily, no matter what." And that was the hardest part, trying to convince them that things would be okay, when I wasn't even sure they would be. Kelly and I had agreed to a joint custody arrangement. We were both committed to making sure that Ethan and Lily had a sense of stability. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of tension between Kelly and me, especially during the early stages. But slowly, we began to find a rhythm. I started to realize that the love we once had for each other wasn't enough to hold us together, but our shared love for our kids would be the bond that kept us connected, even if it wasn't in the way I had hoped. It was around this time that I met someone new. Her name was Sarah. She worked with me at the financial firm I was now leading after the divorce. At first, it was nothing serious, just casual chats during lunch breaks, the occasional coffee. But there was something different about her. Something that made me feel alive again. She wasn't trying to fix me. She wasn't looking to heal my wounds or take away my pain. She was just there. And for the first time in months, I felt like maybe I could move forward. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for me again. For us. But it wasn't a decision I made lightly. The hurt from my past was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. Couldn't erase it. I couldn't forget it. But Sarah made me realize that life wasn't over. That the story didn't have to end in heartbreak and regret. Could still turn into something new, something beautiful. It's funny how life works out sometimes. The twists, the turns, the unexpected paths that we find ourselves walking down. When Kelly and I first met, I never imagined that we'd end up here. Sitting across from each other in a courtroom, dividing up our lives, our memories, our future. But life doesn't always go the way we plan. And sometimes that's for the best. As the divorce finally came to a close, there was a sense of finality. It wasn't a victory, nor a defeat. It was just done. The lawyer handed me the papers, and I signed them without a second thought. This chapter of my life was over. And though I knew it would take time to heal, I also knew it was time to start fresh. It wasn't easy at first. The days felt long, the nights even longer. The absence of Kelly in the house was a constant reminder of what I had lost, of what we had both lost. But in the silence, something beautiful began to emerge. A sense of peace. A peace that came from knowing I had done everything I could. I had fought for us. I had tried. But sometimes trying isn't enough. And now I was ready for the next chapter. Kelly and I still had to figure out how to co-parent. We weren't friends, not by any means, but we were partners in one thing, our kids. Ethan and Lily needed us both, and that would always bind us, no matter how far apart we grew. And while it wasn't always easy, there were still moments of tension, moments where the bitterness would flare up again. I knew that we had to make it work. For them. One afternoon, when it was my turn to pick up the kids, I found myself standing in front of Kelly's apartment. I had been dreading this moment for weeks, standing face to face with her again, not as a husband, but as a co-parent. The last time we had spoken, there were tears, there was hurt, and I didn't know what to expect this time. But when Kelly opened the door, it wasn't the same. There was no tension, no anger, no defensiveness. She looked different, softer somehow. Maybe it was the weight of everything that had happened, or maybe it was just the passage of time, but she wasn't the same woman I had confronted all those weeks ago. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice quiet.
Que não vai hurt you.
"And I know I can't take it back. But I hope we can find a way to move forward. For the kids. For us." Her words weren't perfect. They weren't a magical fix for everything we'd been through. But it was a start. It was a recognition that, while we couldn't undo the past, we could still work together to make a better future for Ethan and Lily. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was carrying the burden alone. We spoke for a few minutes longer, exchanging small pleasantries, before I took the kids and left. As I drove home, I reflected on the conversation. It wasn't easy. There was still a lot of pain. But something inside me had shifted. I didn't have to forgive Kelly to move on. I didn't have to erase the hurt to find peace. But I could choose how I let it affect me. And in that moment, I knew that I had chosen the right path for myself. As the weeks turned into months, I began to find new rhythms in my life. The loneliness didn't sting as much, and I started to focus on things that had been neglected for far too long. My work, my friends, my hobbies, and slowly I started to open up to the idea of new connections. Then came Sarah. I didn't expect it. I wasn't looking for anything new. But sometimes, life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Sarah and I had been co-workers for a while, and we developed a solid friendship over time. At first, it was just coffee breaks and casual chats. But soon, I realized there was something more there. We started seeing each other outside of work. We'd grab dinner, go for walks, talk about everything and nothing. She wasn't trying to fix me or replace Kelly. She was just there. She didn't carry any of the baggage that had weighed me down for so long. And, for the first time in a while, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't the same as what I had with Kelly. It wasn't meant to be, but it was real. It was new, and it gave me hope. I took things slow with Sarah, making sure that I wasn't rushing into something just because I was afraid of being alone. But as time passed, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could be happy again. I could move forward. I could build something new. And that was something I had never truly believed before. Looking back, I've learned a lot through this whole experience. At first, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was losing Kelly, losing the life we had built. But now, I know that the real pain came from losing myself in the process. I had poured so much into our marriage, into being a good husband and father, that I had forgotten to take care of myself. I had forgotten who I was outside of the roles I played. And when everything fell apart, it wasn't just the marriage that ended. It was the person I had become. But in the wreckage, I found myself again. I found the strength to move on. I found the courage to embrace the unknown. It wasn't easy. It still isn't. There are days when I wish things had turned out differently. But I've come to accept that life doesn't always give you the story you expect. Sometimes it's up to you to write the next chapter. A few months after the divorce was finalized, I sat down with Ethan and Lily, both of them sitting cross-legged on the couch next to me. They were getting older, and I could see the changes in them. Ethan was growing up so fast, starting to become his own person. Lily was still my little girl, but even she was starting to understand more about what had happened. "I know things have been different lately," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I want you both to know that no matter what, I love you, and I'll always be here for you." Ethan looked at me, his eyes serious for such a young kid. "I know, Dad. I love you too." Lily leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. "I love you too, Daddy." In that moment, I knew everything was going to be okay. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we would figure it out together. We were going to be okay. And as I walked into the future, whatever it held, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. So, as I close this chapter, I want to leave you with one thought. Life is full of unexpected twists. The road ahead might not always be what you planned, but that doesn't mean it can't lead to something good. Sometimes the hardest moments are the ones that help you grow the most. And for me, this was just the beginning. The pain, the heartbreak, it had all taught me something. It had taught me the power of moving forward, the power of healing, and the power of letting go. Thank you all for watching and being part of this journey with me. If you like this story, make sure to like, share, and leave a comment below. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more stories. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Take care, everyone. And remember, life keeps moving and so do we.